Hello, everyone, and welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast presented by DraftKings Pick6. I am Mike Barner. He is Kirien Sprecher, and we are going to be with you every Wednesday to help you win your fantasy basketball drafts. Kirien, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Let's get into it.
Yeah, we have less than 2 weeks before the start of the NBA season. You might kind of be in a football mindset right now, but you have less than 2 weeks to draft your fantasy basketball squads. Now, it's fantasy basketball. It's the NBA. It's injuries. What would the NBA be without injuries? So as we get you prepared for your drafts here, Kirien, let's do some discussion here on some of the most recent injury news. And we'll start out with Pelicans' Trey Murphy III. He has a hamstring injury. The initial reports are he will be re-examined in 3 weeks. So that means we might not see him until November. He was expected to be the main scoring option off the bench for the Pelicans this season. Not good news right off the bat there for Trey Murphy.
Yeah, not at all. With DeJounte Murray leaving New Orleans, coming into New Orleans, there was probably going to be a competition in that backcourt anyways. This injury pushes Murphy down even farther. Like you said, reevaluated in 3 weeks, which was going to be right around opening night anyways. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be ready to go right away. So we're probably looking at start of November, maybe mid-November for him to come back. And then you have a week, of him ramping up minutes. So moving him definitely down at least a couple of rounds in ADP right now.
Yeah, when you get an injury update on a player, you never want to hear reevaluated in. That means it's probably going to be longer, if not significantly longer. We could be looking at 4+ weeks without Trey Murphy for the Pelicans. Now, the Trailblazers, they've got 2 injuries of significance. Shaedon Sharpe, shoulder injury, out 4 to 6 weeks. Robert Williams, hamstring injury, out at least 2 weeks. 2 key depth pieces for the Trailblazers, Kirien, already on the shelf.
Yep, it feels like the 2023-24 season is just being elongated with these Portland injuries. Towards the end of last season, they were rolling out who knows what rotations towards the end of last season. I really am a big Sharpe fan. I thought he was on his way to stardom last year before the injury, and now another injury. So really disappointing. That kind of just opens the door for Scoot Henderson and Anthony Simons to just lead this backcourt for the foreseeable future. And then, Robert Williams, we don't really need to get too much into that. I feel like even if you weren't following the NBA really closely and you were just like, hey, did you know Robert Williams was injured? You'd be like, oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, I don't think Robert Williams wasn't really on our draft radar with Ayton and clinging in the fold. Williams probably wasn't going to get a ton of action anyway. So with his injury history, yeah, he is a do not draft unless you're in a pretty deep league. So now we're going to move on to the Raptors. RJ Barrett has a shoulder sprain. He is going to be out for the remainder of the preseason. An important note, it's an injury to his right shoulder. He is a left-handed shooter. So a little bit of a silver lining there, Kirien.
Yeah, that gives me at least a little bit of optimism that, he won't need that ramp up period to get going. He's not going to have to not shoot for these 3 weeks. And then have to ramp back up once he's cleared for action again. But this still is concerning. Toronto isn't expected to be at the top of the leaderboards. They really have no reason to push him to start right away because they're just in a developmental area period already. And I've already heard reports out of Toronto camp that they're this isn't our season to win the NBA Finals. We aren't competing for that. And I like the honesty, but it's we have a lot of guys that need to get minutes. We want to see what Quigley and Barrett can do. Can they continue what they did after that midseason trade? Got to get Grady Dick some minutes. There's also a couple other young guys on the roster that are also injured at the moment. So I feel like the Raptors are going to struggle right out of the gate if they don't have Barrett. But like you said, it's non-shooting shoulder. So I have a little bit of optimism that he'll at least be ready to go after the first week or 2 of the regular season.
Yeah, there was a lot of shenanigans going on at the end of last season with the Raptors tanking draft picks and all that kind of stuff. But after he was traded to the Raptors, Barrett averaged just under 22 points, 6.4 rebounds, just over 4 assists, and 1.5 3-pointers over 32 games. So that's pretty good production.
I was very excited about Barrett. I'll talk about him a little bit later. He was one of my buy low candidates when I wrote my notes, and then the news came out, and I felt like a dummy. But I'll talk a little bit more about when he's on the court. I'm excited for what he could do in Toronto.
Yeah, we're going to cross our fingers that this is just a preseason precaution. Maybe if he does miss any regular season time, it's just a game or 2. So now we're going to move on to the Phoenix Suns. Yusuf Nurkic, finger injury. He is going to be out at least a week. This is pretty crazy. Nurkic played 76 games last season. Prior to that, he had played 108 games combined over the previous 2 seasons. He has played at least 70 games in a season just 3 times in his career. So for a guy who's been pretty injury prone, I don't like him being on the injury report already. What do you think, Kirien?
Yeah, like I said last week, I'm a pretty conservative fantasy player, right? So I look at those games played. That's my first thing that I look at, see what the trends are there. And last season, I was not in on Nurkic at all because of that exact reason. And then he ended up playing a bunch of games. This Phoenix team is weird. Sometimes he kind of like runs the Domantas Sabonis role where he's dribble handing off to Booker, Beal, KD. He can rack up some assists quickly. He had a stretch last year where he was just grabbing 20 rebounds every game too. So like I think there is fantasy value. This seems to be, he's a big man. It's a finger injury. He's going to be fine. He's going to be ready to go once the regular season comes around. But there's still question marks about how valuable he can be in fantasy. I think he's probably at best like a backup center on your fantasy team, a center too. You don't want to trust him to start every week, but weeks that he has 4 games, weeks that there's playing teams with injured centers, I think he can have value. And I don't think this is going to impact his status for the start of the regular season.
I think last season was probably best case scenario for Nurkic because A, he was healthy, which he normally isn't. And B, the Suns didn't really have a quote unquote point guard. So he was asked to facilitate more. Tyus Jones is there now. So we might see the ball in Nurkic's hands less. So go ahead.
He was the 66th player in 8 cat leagues last year. Crazy mostly because of the games played and his rebounding numbers. And that was the first time he cracked the top 120 since 2018-19. So I think it was kind of like the perfect storm last year. But who knows? I'm expecting a little bit of a bounce back from the Suns. And if the Suns are good, he should at least like flirt with top 100 value.
All right, well, we got another center who's hurt. Wendell Carter Jr., he has a sprained ankle. Luckily, right now, it's been indicated that it's just day-to-day, so it doesn't seem like an overly serious injury. Carter has had injury issues throughout his career, Kirien. He has played in fewer than 60 games in 5 of the last 6 seasons. Big contract for a guy who's been hurt quite a bit.
Yeah, that was super weird timing. He left the preseason game like screaming and had to be like helped off the court. And you're like, oh no, here we go again. Wendell Carter, our bull, our former bull.
Bulls minute here on the Wednesday RotoWire.
It only took us 8 minutes. It only took us 8 minutes.
That's right. We did it. We held out.
But yeah, he looked visibly frustrated. He's had to be helped off, and you're like, oh no, here we go again. He's probably going to be sidelined for a couple weeks, may miss the start of the regular season. And then like that night, or maybe the next morning, he signed a 3-year, $60 million extension. And you're like, that's odd timing. And then the next day, it was announced that he avoided a major injury, and it was just day to day. So really good news there. Like you said, he is injury prone, so keep an eye on Mo Wagner. Goga was there for a little bit last year too. While this is a day-to-day injury, injuries are going to be a concern for Carter probably throughout the season.
And another injury-prone guy, Wizards guard Malcolm Brogdon. He is going to be out at least 1 month, torn ligament in his right thumb that required surgery. He has played in fewer than 60 games in 4 of the last 5 seasons. The Wizards rebuilding team, veteran on there. He was probably a trade candidate at some point during the season anyways, but Kirien, he's out right from the start here.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like every offseason, there comes a period, like a week in the offseason where you're like, is this the year where I draft Ben Simmons and Malcolm Brogdon again? And then the angel on your good shoulder is like, don't do it, man. Don't do it. Don't do it. This is not surprising. Kind of like Robert Williams. This has been the story with Brogdon for at least the last couple of years. When he was in Milwaukee, he was an absolute star. El Presidente, they called him. He won the Rookie of the Year. He had some really good moments. And it just hasn't been able to. I don't want to say go downhill. When he's on the court, good things happen. He just hasn't been able to stay on the court. So this isn't really news. And then, like we've mentioned with all these other injuries, at least a month he's reportedly out, and then it'll probably be another couple of weeks before he's back to playing 25 plus minutes and having a fantasy relevant role.
And then he'll be in trade rumors, and he'll play maybe 10 total games before he gets traded. So basically, without Brogdon, we've got the Jordan Poole unleashed point guard experiment. And then in terms of who's going to play shooting guard, combination of Bilal Coulibaly and Corey Kispert. Kispert I actually like in deeper formats. He's a good three-point shooter. So he's someone, if you're hunting for threes very late in drafts and, maybe a 14-team league, I take a chance on him. Are you excited about the Jordan Poole point guard experience, Kirien? Come on.
I think Poole he kind of found he got benched last season. Like, I don't know if it was mid-season, whatever. But he kind of he worked his way back in the starting lineup, and he was kind of like feeling himself. He put up some good performances. I don't think I'm super sold on him. I still feel like his ADP is a little too high because, there are fantasy players that are just like, oh, Jordan Poole, I know that name. Maybe last season turned him off a little bit. I'm kind of if with Brogdon out, Coulibaly's kind of my guy. You mentioned Kispert. I think he has probably a higher floor, just because we know what kind of player he is. Like you said, he's going to give you some threes, maybe some steals here and there. But Coulibaly's kind of like a mystery box, so to speak, right? If he gets 30 minutes, who knows what's going to happen? Could be good, could be really bad. But where he's being drafted right now, you don't really need a sure thing. So I would be willing to take a chance on Coulibaly with Brogdon out for a while.
All right. Now we're going to move on to the Nets. And if you're listening to this and you're 6'8" or higher, make sure you keep your phone line open. The Nets are dealing with some injuries at center. Day'Ron Sharpe is going to miss multiple weeks with a hamstring injury. Trendon Watford, he's out at least 2 weeks. Nick Claxton's been battling a little hamstring soreness, not anything too concerning at this time. So behind Claxton, we're looking at Noah Clowney, Ben Simmons. Yuck. Kirien, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Noah Clowney is probably the guy here. There's a lot of Twitter hype around him, just like with Coulibaly, he's an unknown kind of player. This is just not a good situation. The Nets are not good. Cam Thomas is probably going to shoot 40 times a game. Dorian Finney-Smith hasn't made multiple three-pointers in a game in like 3 years. Nobody fact check me on that, but it's just not a good situation. If you have whenever any team has 3 or 4 centers with hamstring injuries, that's going to be a major cause for alarm. And when it's the Nets, it's just like, here we go again. But like we saw in Washington last year, after the Daniel Gafford trade, Marvin Bagley had, moments of fantasy glory. So you got to keep an eye on this situation, see how it plays out. All reports say that Claxton will probably be healthy by the regular season, so we don't need to, reach for Noah Clowney if he's there at the end of the draft. Maybe you take him and see if he can solidify that backup role. The Day'Ron Sharpe thing, I don't know about you, but everybody in the fantasy world seems to like to talk about his per 36 minutes. Are you a big fan of him? Have you been waiting for him to like get on the court and play more? I feel like that's
the thing is, I don't like drafting these guys on these by far worst teams in the league when they're going to be a backup, because you can think, well, Claxton, there's going to be some blowouts. So there's going to be some games where he plays like 24 minutes. So maybe that helps the backup center. As the season goes on, they might be tanking, so he could play more at the end. But we could get in this situation where they're tanking so hard that the third string center is the guy who's starting over the final 3 weeks of the season. So you were hoping to get a month of the backup being the starter, and then you get none. I don't like to play that game. That's a little bit of roulette. I'm out. I want no part of that.
I'm the same way. I also feel like when you are watching the games and you're like, oh, like I got a guy on the Nets, like maybe he can get some big points today. I need big points to salvage my week in fantasy. And then you're watching the Nets game and you're like, why did I make this decision? Why did I pick anyone on this team?
Yeah, he's not playing. They've got G League guys up. I mean, it's just the end. If you're trying to play for guys that are going to play at the end of the season for tanking teams, if you're trying to guess that, don't guess that in October, because that's very hard to get that right.
100%.
So we're going to finish up the injury here. We're going to do a little bit of rapid fire, Kirien. You tell me if you're worried about any of these. These are some big names, but it looks like some minor injuries. So first we got Luka Doncic dealing with a calf contusion. He suffered it during a private workout. He's had some tightness, I guess, in the calf. Not in danger of missing any regular season games at this time. We might not see him much during the preseason. Jaren Jackson Jr. for the Grizzlies low-grade hamstring strain, not expected to miss the season opener. The Heat have two groin strains, Tyler Hero, Jaime Jaquez, not expected to miss the start of the regular season. And Ja Morant looks like he avoided serious injury Monday against the Mavericks. His injury is being deemed as a minor ankle tweak. We like to hear tweaks, Kirien.
Yeah, Ja Morant, not worried. He left and then came back and then left again. It was a preseason game, probably precautionary. Hero and Jaquez, the Heat were just like, they're not going to scrimmage tonight and they're not going to play in the preseason game tomorrow. And that was all we got. So that's a little concerning. I'll give that a yellow flag. Jaren Jackson is also yellow. We not really sure how healthy he was towards the end of last season. The Grizzlies were super banged up. This is not a good start. The Jackson's fantasy profile took a weird turn last year too. Not really worried about the injury, but probably more concerned about his fantasy profile this year. He's not going to get many blocks if Zach Edey is going to start at center, which he did to start the regular or preseason. And so if he's not getting blocks and he's not an efficient offensive player and he doesn't get assists or rebounds, not really sure why we're drafting Jaren Jackson so high, but I'm not really worried about his injury. The Luka Doncic thing, he proved he could play through injuries last year. He was basically dealing with contusions to both legs and, for the entire playoffs. And then he went right into trying to prepare for the Olympics. Slovenia didn't make it, but he was still out there playing heavy minutes. So not worried about the Doncic injury. I think he's proven that he can play through those minor bumps and bruises. And that's probably just a precautionary thing as well.
Thank goodness we're finally through the gloom and doom part of today's podcast. And up next, we are going to talk about our favorite players who are being drafted outside the top 100 on Yahoo. But first, let's hear a word from our great friends.
We're thrilled to be partnering up with DraftKings Pick6 this NBA season. And we still got a little time before opening night, but plenty of NFL options available over at Pick6. Really been enjoying playing there each and every weekend. I think a certain quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards. How about your favorite receiver scoring a touchdown? Check out Pick6, the newest way to play fantasy football and win cash with DraftKings. Here's how it works. Just pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. For football, we're talking yards, catches, touchdowns, etc. Lock in your picks and compete against opponents for a shot to win huge cash prizes. Download the all-new DraftKings Pick6 app right now and use our code ROTOPICK. That's ROTOPICK, ROTOPICK. For new Pick6 customers, play at least $5, get $50 in Pick6 credits guaranteed. Again, that code is ROTOPICK. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
Thanks again for DraftKings Pick6 for being a sponsor of the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast. All right, now, we all know you want to draft Nikola Jokic? Yep, he's pretty good. How about Victor Wembanyama? Yeah, he's pretty good too. But, Kirien, we want to find those gems. We want to get guys who are currently being drafted outside the top 100 on Yahoo. Who's first on your list?
All right. So like I mentioned earlier, I did this list yesterday morning and then the RJ Barrett news came out. So my first guy was RJ Barrett. Before the injury, he was just outside the top 100. His ADP was 101. That's probably going to drop at least, 10, 15 spots now with the injury. People are going to be worried about that. They don't want a guy in their starting lineup who's injured. But I agree. If he falls to that 120, 130 range, I'm probably still scooping him up if I can hold him on my bench for a couple weeks while he works back to full strength. But I just think he's a super interesting profile, right? Super high draft pedigree, came to New York. The New York Lights, what they can do to people is just a little too bright for him. He really struggled with his efficiency. That was the main thing. He would get to the rack, he would get open looks from three, but it just wasn't really as fluid, as efficient as a top 3 pick should have been. But he got traded to Toronto last year. The expectations were off of him, and he was absolutely amazing. 32 games, 22 points, 6.5 rebounds, 4 assists. He shot 55% from the field and 39% from deep. Those are great efficiency numbers for a forward. His career marks are 44 and 35%, 44% from the field, 35% from deep. So that's a stark contrast. And I think, I don't want to put it all into like, oh, he changed teams and then didn't have the pressure on him. But like, I do think that's like a big thing. We're talking about New York compared to Toronto. No offense to any of my Canadian homies, but it's just a different vibe there. There are some negatives, like there's going to be with all of these players we're going to mention. There's a reason why they're not being drafted in the top 100. They have flaws, right? Like that, you just kind of have to like see which players are expected to improve on those flaws a little bit, and maybe which are just going to revert back to the mean. Barrett's free throw percentage is a huge concern, especially for a guy that's super aggressive. He shot only 63% from the charity stripe in Toronto, which is weird that he was so efficient from the field in three, but couldn't make his free throws. He's a better career free throw shooter than that. So I expect there to be a little regression to the mean on both sides. And overall, when he's healthy, like I think that's going to make like a pretty solid fantasy contributor. We talked about not wanting like players on bad teams, which is fair. But I think when if you're drafting a guy like RJ Barrett, who can put up 25 and 5 and like at pick 120, like I'm going to overlook a little bit of poor free throw shooting every once in a while.
I like it. Now you're going with a guy that left the Knicks. I'm starting off with a guy who's still on the Knicks, Josh Hart. We talked about him last week. Right now, his ADP is 115 on Yahoo. If you need scoring, Josh Hart's not your guy. However, he averaged 8.3 rebounds and 4.1 assists per game last season. What I like about him, he has missed a total of 7 games over the last 2 seasons. The Knicks do not have great depth. They have great starters, but behind them, it's a little bit questionable. One of their key starters, OG Anunoby, has played in 50 or fewer games in 3 of the last 4 seasons. Is he going to play 65-plus games this year with Tom Thibodeau playing him 35 minutes a night? I doubt it. So I think Hart's going to play a ton. Now, just for a comparison around what you're looking at here for ADP, Chris Middleton has an ADP of 106. I beg of you, do not take Chris Middleton over Josh Hart. Chris Middleton cannot stay healthy. I like Josh Hart at his ADP of 115.
Yeah, no concerns there at all. I think he's going to be playing a bunch of minutes. He's going to be locked into that starting lineup. And I think just the one thing that I would add is that those rebounding numbers, if he's guard eligible in your league, that is even a huge bigger boost if he's guard eligible, because there's, outside of Luka, there's not many guards that are capable of getting double doubles with, points and rebounds, or assists and rebounds for that matter. So I think that's just like a huge like advantage, especially if you're in like a head-to-head league or something. No qualms with Josh Hart. We talked about the Knicks last week. If you're in Thibodeau's, trust circle of trust, you're probably a pretty good option for fantasy. My next guy, I'm going with Keontae George. Like we said, there's all of these players are going to have a little bit of concerns. Like Josh Hart, not a huge scorer. Keontae George, it's his efficiency. That is a concern, but if you're taking him at his ADP 120 right now, you can probably live with that if he's going to put up huge counting stats. A lot of people seem to like Colin Sexton to have another great season in Utah. I could maybe see that happening. But my eyes tell me that Keontae George is the number one guy. He is, Will Hardy is going to lean on this guy. Obviously Markkanen's still there, but like from a backcourt running the offense perspective, George is going to be asked to shoot threes. He's going to be asked to play that. Like, I'm not saying he's Damian Lillard. Don't come at me. But like, he's going to be asked to play that role. He's going to have to hit those deep shots. He's going to have to orchestrate the offense. He's going to have to get Laurie involved. I think there could be huge nights for him, 40-point night maybe. I think you look at a guy like Cade Cunningham. I like Cade Cunningham a lot last year. His ADP is 35, and he's kind of the similar player, right? Like, he's going to put up good numbers on maybe poor efficiency from the field. And I say poor efficiency. Keontae George is 85% free throw shooter. That'll be a huge boost. It's mostly that field goal percentage. So I would much rather take Keontae George at pick 120 than I would Cade Cunningham at pick 35. I'm not saying George will finish ahead of Cunningham, but I think most nights, there will be nights where George outpaces Cunningham by a large margin.
Yeah, if you're in a head-to-head league and you're punting field goal percentage, then George, especially at his ADP, really stands out as someone to target. So for my second option, I'm going to go with Brandon Podziemski of the Warriors at an ADP of 118. No more Splash Brothers. The waves aren't going to be as big out there this year. Podziemski is going to be competing with Buddy Hield and DeAnthony Melton for the starting shooting guard spot. Last season, Podziemski averaged 9.5 points, 6.3 rebounds, 4 assists, 1 steal, and 1.3 3-pointers in the 28 games that he started. So he played pretty well in that role. Again, like Josh Hart, not a ton of points, but you get the extra rebounds there out of the guard spot. Even if he's not a starter, he's going to play more than 25 minutes a game. He's a key, one of the young players that they're building around. Now, you mentioned the war there with Keontae George with his field goal percentage. The war here with Podziemski, he shot 63.3% from the free throw line last year. That is not good. He's going to have to get that up if he's going to reach, real heights in fantasy basketball. But it's not really a question here of him being able to play enough. I think the bigger question is, and it wouldn't be a big surprise, is there a potential that he plays more than 30 minutes a game? If that happens, then he could really be a difference maker at his ADP.
Yeah, I'm super high on Pods. I think that is he's going to win that shooting guard spot. I think DeAnthony Melton is a better defender, so he started the first preseason game. He might start the regular season. Buddy Hield, we all know Buddy Hield is a sharpshooter. He'll have his games where he gets hot, but Pods is the better overall player. He's the younger player. They can develop him into something. Steve Kerr, the issues with Jordan Poole at the end of his tenure in Golden State, well documented, whatever. But you got to give Steve Kerr credit for allowing Poole to develop into that player when you already had Steph and Clay. He knew that he was kind of mixing a lot of volatile things together when adding Poole to that backcourt with Draymond and all of that things. But Poole thrived. They won a championship with Poole. I'm not saying Pods they're not similar players at all. I think Pods is a better all-around player, which probably makes him a safer pick, but super high on him. You mentioned his free throw shooting. In 2 years in college, he shot 75% and then 77%. The free throw line doesn't change from college to the NBA, so I don't know if it was, the fans or something getting to him. So I think it's safe to expect at least a little bit of boost there, which would make him I don't want to say error-proof fantasy player, but if he starts getting that free throw percentage up, the rest of the stats are falling into line. I think he's a great pick at the end of drafts.
Yeah, you get a pretty high floor there for a player who's basically just going inside the top 120. All right, so we've each done 2 guys. We did 3 total coming into the show. So, Kirien, who is your last guy that you're targeting who is currently being drafted outside the top 100 on Yahoo?
I'm going with Jalen Suggs. His ADP on Yahoo is 119. This is more so like we talked about not drafting guys on bad teams. I'm drafting a guy on a team that I think is going to be really good. I think Paolo is fantastic. I think Franz is good. We talked last week about his 3-point shooting. If that gets better, he could turn into a star or solidify himself as a star. He showed that he can be. And I think Suggs is that number 3, honestly. I think his steals production kind of gives him that super high floor. He showed as a rookie he could distribute, but then he wasn't really asked to do that very much. Paolo and Franz are going to run the show. Franz is kind of a point 4 anyways, and Paolo is, that alpha dog that's just going to take the ball when he wants it and go get a bucket. But I think Suggs can get back to averaging over 4 assists, 5 assists. Career high shooting splits last year, 47, 40, 76. I think he's just a really well-rounded player that could thrive defensively on a really good team. I don't want to hype him up too much, and people may think I'm crazy. That playoff series last year, it took them a while to get going, but they really showed that they could be a great team. This team is sound defensively. They just need to get more efficient on the offensive end. I think Suggs, starting point guard for a top 4 team in the East, that may be crazy to say. I don't know what the odds are. But I think Orlando is going to be competing this year, and I think Suggs is going to be a big reason why.
Yeah, and the fact that the Magic's big offseason move was Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. I mean, their top guys are still their top guys. The Magic are a young, ascending team, but they didn't bring in that Paul George type move that had a big ripple effect on the roster.
Yeah, I think KCP is better at everything than Gary Harris was, right? He's a better 3-point shooter. He's a better.
That's the understatement of the podcast.
I don't mean to throw Gary Harris under the bus, sorry, buddy, but KCP should open up that floor. It should make everybody's lives easier for sure.
All right, I'm going to wrap things up here with a veteran. Norman Powell of the Los Angeles Clippers His current ADP is 134. So we're going pretty deep here. The Clippers are a very top-heavy team. It's Kawhi Leonard, it's James Harden, and then a lot of guys now that Paul George is gone. They're going to need scoring. That's what Powell thrives with. He averaged at least 16 points in 4 of the last 5 seasons. He didn't last year because of the downtick in both playing time and usage rate. For his career, he is a 39.5% three-point shooter. Now, rebounds, assists, defensive stats, you're not going to get much of that for Powell. However, if you need scoring late in your draft, he's the guy to target. Kawhi Leonard is always hurt. So when he's out, and it's not like James Harden is exactly a guy you can rely on night in and night out too. I mean, there's going to be games where maybe both of those guys aren't playing. And in that case, Norman Powell is going to have a pretty hefty usage rate. What I like about him, like I said, no rebounds, assists, defensive stats. Outside of points and three-pointers, he's also efficient. For his career, 46.8% from the field and 82.8% from the free throw line. So at pick ADP 134, let's go old. Let's go Norman Powell.
Yeah, I have no issues with it. We aren't really sure if Kawhi is going to be ready. As usual, the Clippers and his camp are, holding everything back, not really giving us ample updates on how his status is going. So Powell could be a starter right out of the gate. And like you said, he is a bucket getter. And it's worth noting that, at the end of drafts, there's guys that you can go out and get for rebounds, right? There's guys you can go, there's guys Matisse Thybulle, you can go out and get him for steals, like assists. There's Chris Paul, Tyus Jones, but points are kind of hard to come by at the end of drafts. Like if you score, you're probably getting drafted pretty high already because you're a good player and the team wants to give you the balls. So like you said, Powell's a scorer available at the end of drafts. If you are lacking scoring, you should absolutely snatch him up at that ADP. And I think if Kawhi is out, he's just a good all-around play, to be honest with you.
All right, so now everybody knows who to target outside the top 100. So if you didn't listen to the show last week, first of all, what's the matter with you? Second of all, let's talk about our shtick here. No, we don't have the old man rant. I am much older than Kirien, but I am not as old as Ken. So that's his thing. So our way to conclude the show is our what was that stat line of the week. During the season, we'll talk about a stat line that was either crazy good or crazy bad and kind of put it into some context for fantasy basketball. We don't have any games yet. We're not going to give you a what was that preseason line. That's pushing it a little bit. So let's look at some guys' stats from last season. Kirien, what is your what was that stat line of the week?
I'm starting off with a guy we talked about already, Jaren Jackson. Jackson averaged 1.6 blocks per game last year. That's pretty good. You think about 1.6, you're like, oh, that's great. But then you add in the fact that he blocked 3 blocks per game the year before and 2.3 the year before that. His 1.6 blocks last year had managers saying, what was that? He was asked to do more offensively, right? John Morant was out, Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart. We know about all of the injuries, so he was probably asked to do more offensively. That kind of impacted his defensive impact a little bit. And then I talked about it already. The Grizzlies are super high on Zach Edey. They're gonna try to make this thing work with him at center, and that's gonna push Jackson to the 4. He's not gonna be in the paint as often. I don't think, and then you add in the fact that all those guys that I mentioned are going to be healthy again. Jackson isn't going to have that offensive output, and then maybe he doesn't have as strong of a defensive impact on games. And I'm really concerned about Jackson's fantasy value this season. And, I don't want to say 1.6 blocks is bad, but people that were drafting him with the top 20 pick, top 30 pick last year were definitely not pleased with the output that they got.
Yeah, I love you bringing this one as your what was that this week because he's not a good rebounder. So
No.
the reason what makes him so valuable is his threes and his defensive stats. So if his usage rate goes down and his blocks go down, he already doesn't get you hardly any rebounds. That's not good. So yeah, that's definitely scary. All right, now my what was that stat line of the week? Walker Kessler averaged 23 minutes per game last season. Now, in his rookie season, he became a starter in January. In that role, he averaged 11.9 points, 10.5 rebounds, and 2.9 blocks. The key, he averaged 28 minutes per game. So, bad team, young emerging center. He's going to play a lot next year, right? Wrong. He played 23 minutes per game last season. What was that? They brought in John Collins. That didn't help. Kelly Olynyk was stealing minutes from him. Why in the world they're playing Kelly Olynyk over Walker Kessler on a young team that wasn't expected to make the playoffs? I don't get it. Now, Olynyk's gone. Great. Hooray. Nope. Taylor Hendricks, young player. He's going to get a lot of playing time. Could he start at power forward? Maybe. So, good news with Kessler. Even with his reduced playing time, he averaged 2.4 blocks per game last season. Problem is, didn't come anywhere near averaging a double-double like he did when he was playing 28 minutes per game in his rookie season as a starter. Can we please get rid of John Collins? The problem is the Hawks couldn't get rid of him. They tried for years. No one wanted him. Why? Contract stinks. He's under contract this season. Next season, he has a $26.6 million player option. Guess what? He's going to pick that up because no one in their right mind is going to pay him anywhere near that. So are we looking at 23 minutes a game for Walker Kessler again this season and next? Possibly. I don't like it. What was that? Please stop it, Kirien, with this Walker Kessler limited minutes. Garbage.
I'm a huge Will Hardy fan. I think that he's the perfect guy for that rebuild. Danny Ainge does his magic, stockpiling picks and stuff. But that Kessler thing, I can't defend it. I don't know what was really the thinking behind that. You weren't going to compete anyway, so if he was a liability playing that extra 7 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever it was, like I don't see why wasting wins last year wouldn't help for this year with his development through playing through those issues. If they didn't want to give him those minutes last year, I don't know why they would want to give him those minutes this year. I think he's a good piece. The Trailblazers just drafted Klingon like 6th overall, 7th overall, whatever it was, and he's basically the same player. So like clearly the NBA, other people around the NBA that are making decisions think that type of player can make an impact. So you would think that, if they wanted, and then I saw a report that if Utah was going to trade him, they'd trade him for 2 first-round picks. How can you ask for 2 first-round picks for a guy that you don't even want to give 20 minutes to and you can't even win 30 games? Like that, it just doesn't make any sense.
Now listen, they like these veterans, okay? Oh, Kelly Olynyk, we got to play. So I have an idea. This is your second Bulls minute of the fantasy. How about they trade Walker Kessler to the Bulls? You want Nikola Vucevic? You want Zach LaVine? Come on, take one of these garbage. If you don't want Walker Kessler, the Bulls will take him. I didn't say we. I stopped myself. I didn't say we. But please. Kirien, my blood pressure is so high right now. Like this Walker Kessler, 23 minutes a game, I can't take it. I'm approaching 40. I can't do this. My doctor's not going to let. I got to calm down.
Are you getting the little beeps on your Apple Watch or something?
Jeez. All right. Before I get any more frustrated, we think we better wrap it up here. We haven't gotten any emails from Nick or anybody yet. We haven't dropped the we on the Bulls, so we're going to get out while we're ahead here. So next week, again, every Wednesday, Kirien and I are going to be coming to you with the fantasy basketball information that you need to win your leagues. Next week will be our final Wednesday show before the season starts. So we'll have some great draft final tidbits for you. Again, we want to thank our sponsors at DraftKings Pick6. Good luck to everyone during your fantasy basketball drafts, and play Walker Kessler more.
Peace out, everybody.